It is fluid. It is ambient. It is not binary, right? Think about what you do. Think about what I do. Look at my goddamn kids, what they do, right? And I tell them what I do, and I tell them, there's a funnel. They're like, what's a funnel?
This is the Snarketing Podcast, for marketers, by marketers, talking to marketers with just a touch of snark. Now, here are your hosts, Valerie Vespa and Matt Wurst.
It's so nice to see your face.
It's nice to see your face and hear your voice because depending on whether you're listening or watching this, we are available in multimedia formats. Are you an avatar? You're not an avatar, right? We haven't gone that way yet?
Not yet.
It's going to take me like a year to figure out how to do that, by the way. It would take AI 8 seconds, but I'm not that sophisticated in that way.
You are so sophisticated. Anyway, don't undervalue yourself and your abilities. Coming off of Possible and seeing
Cannes. 2 weeks ago. Here we are. We're in the middle. This period here.
And that Cannes is very close to happening, and which will both be there and are capable of moderating anyone's panels should anyone need
plug that. Alert. Plug alert. Plug alert.
Is that a button?
It should be. Just boop, plug alert.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll do it. By the way, we'll do it for free. Maybe we'll even pay you.
Anyway, so I'm wondering if the Cannes Festival of Arts is going to be the Cannes Festival of Commerce.
Have we made the shift from right brain to left brain? Is it official?
I think it must be a concern of the Cannes Festival themselves, I would imagine.
Well, they've lost so much money to parallel programming over the years that the award show for creative, I don't know what you called it. You called it an art show. It was the Creative Festival of International Intrigue, or whatever the name is. It's not that anymore. It is celebrity, ad tech, platform, media, brandapalooza. And the first time I went to Cannes 10 years ago, however many years ago it was, the celebrities there were the creative directors who won the Grand Prix that would walk into the Carlton with their trophies. And now those people can't even find a place to stay within 50 miles of the beach.
And how do you feel about this?
That's cool. It's fine with me. It's going to be fun. I'm excited to see celebrities. Let's not lie. And if the ad tech people want to take me on a yacht to Saint-Tropez, cool, I'm into. All right, I have totally sold out. There's plenty of other places where we can celebrate creativity, like your out-of-home billboards and other things of that nature. So cool, that's fine. I appreciate them when I see them in the subway. But let's be real. I'm there to get wined and dined. I'm there to do the wining and dining. And commerce is driving this. That is what's happening here. Well, I might have to debut some new pastel-colored pants while I'm there.
I love it.
But speaking of, this is all tying back to commerce because I got to go shopping. And who's going to woo me into their pants? Wait, that sounds weird. Who is going to put me in their pants today?
That's also weird.
Yes.
That's also weird.
But retail media, like there's an entire side retail media summit happening at the Carlton on Wednesday in Cannes. They're like all the Beat TV, brand innovators. They're having all these tracks on retail and commerce. Yeah. So look, we got to get down with this because this is where we're going as an industry, at least as a big track. And, segue alert here. We happen to have one of the foremost experts from an agency perspective on all of the things that are happening with data technology and commerce. He is someone that we are just meeting, but he is a friend of a friend, right? Our good friend and your colleague introduced us. You want to give him a shout out?
Mr. Tommy McGurn. We love you, Tommy.
Tom looks great in pastel pants too. I have seen him in the tropics. He can rock some salmon polo Ralph Lauren pants like anyone.
I think so.
So George Musi, he's the Chief Business Officer at Night Market, which is a relatively new role for him within the Horizon Media Network.
Yes.
And he is, again, as we did some pre-research, he is chock full of information. I feel like he's someone we could just press the go button and he could school us for like a 40-minute lecture as if we were students in his class. But let's try and make it a little conversational and try and keep up and pretend to understand what he's talking about.
Nice. Let's do it.
All right. Here we go.
What happens when you blend media, data, AI, and commerce into a single precision-engineered growth machine? On this episode of the Snarketing Podcast, we sit down with George Musi, Chief Business Officer at Night Market, Horizon Media's commerce powerhouse, to unpack how his team is reinventing the path to purchase by starting where most stop, at the sale. From ROI to AI, George shares sharp insights on how brands can thrive in today's dynamic decision-fatigued market. Tap in and listen up, because this is where strategy meets conversion.
Hi, George. Welcome to the Snarketing Podcast. Really excited to have you here. Excited to jump in. You are a pro. Everybody has worked with you at some point, but I feel like you got a lot to share. So we're going to jump right in and get to know you a little bit better. And all we ask is that you bring a little bit of snark. Can you do that?
I can, definitely.
Okay, perfect. Well, I figured you can because you've had an epic run across this industry. Like me, you've worked at big agencies, you've started things from scratch, right? But in this career that you've built, I am curious now, if you looked back and talked to 25-year-old George, what would he think of your LinkedIn or your resume today? Would he be impressed? Would he be surprised? Would he be excited about the journey you've had?
Yeah. First, thank you for having me. It's an honor, and this is I've listened to quite a few of them, and you guys do a great job.
You still said yes when we invited you. You did.
I still said yes.
You gotta listen closer next time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't come from a traditional agency background, quite the opposite of that. And it's probably made me better suited for a disruptive space. So I got my degree in some things that you would never associate to where I ended up, right? So I did applied sociology, cultural anthropology, and consumer behavior. More specifically, consumer psychiatry, right? So all those things were interesting because I didn't pick those things. I actually needed to find something else because I actually wanted to become a doctor, an MD. And I lost my nerve when my dad passed away too young. And thank you. And I always liked the research aspect of it all. I always like understanding how people think and why they say what they say and what they do. And I always saw the kind of the humanity behind being a doctor. And so I lean more towards understanding people. But sometimes you have to understand people through numbers. And so I got really good at interpreting and then bringing those numbers to life so you can actually convince people to do something. And then I started my career and this is before the internet, right? So there was no such thing as big data. And the way we collected data back then was actually still telephone interviews, face-to-face, right? Surveys. You used to send $1 through the mail. Believe it or not, those are still the best ways to people respond.
Oh, that's how medicine used to be done too, but it's not done that way anymore either. So
exactly. So I did that. And then as the world was evolving, I realized that I wanted to become more sophisticated in my ability to interpret numbers. So I lean heavily towards data science, modeling, advanced analytics. I always tell people, we talk about AI and ML like they're new things. And I tell them that we've been doing it for like 40 years. And people like that, no, they're new. And then, well, it's new to you, but it's definitely not new to most people that have been doing this for a long time. And then I worked my way through the world. I've always wanted to understand people, businesses, societies, how to bring a company into a different country, how to pull them out of a different country, how to expand. So I spent half of my career overseas, not living, but working. It felt like I was living there because I was spending way too much time in those countries. But it was great because it gave me a really good understanding of how to work with people from different backgrounds, from different perspectives, from different time frames. Right, which is crazy in this day and age. And nobody would have thunk that we would have been a connected global anything, right, in this day and age, right? And then I worked my way into the agency world, right? And I started understanding this world of, although I was working in marketing and advertising, was never on the end of creating marketing and advertising, more of about how to help somebody understand and create, right, that mechanism that actually drives sales. Back then, data and analytics people like, hey, you guys focus on reporting. Don't worry about that, right? We'll have somebody else interpret what you're saying, right? Or we'll have somebody else kind of dumb it down a little more for the CMOs and the CFOs. And I was sitting in these conversations. I'm like, man, that has to suck, right? Why the hell do you have to dumb anything down for anybody, right? It's quite the opposite, right? You want to be able to give people this notion of sophistication, but without scaring the hell out of them, right? We're like, whoa, I just feel like I just walked into a PhD class, right? You don't want that neither. So
no, and if you think about research and insights, right? If you are understanding and studying and thinking about people to then understand the audience that you are, or to whom you are delivering those insights, it is not a one-way path.
It's not. And what I started realizing is I still want to do that. I love that. That becomes the core anchor. I hedge my bets that data analytics, advanced analytics, were going to be the key thing in the future. I could have been wrong. I wasn't wrong, right? And that's quite the opposite of it, right?
Yeah.
So
you could take a victory lap there. That's okay. Yeah.
But I also said to myself, I actually want to be the person that takes that and evolves it and transforms it into where I can have a conversation with a CMO, a CFO, a CDO, a CIO boardrooms, right? I don't want to have filters between subject matter experts and thought leaders and having a direct conversation where somebody can straddle this notion of strategic, tactical, and operational at the same time.
And is that, go ahead, Valerie. I think we were going to ask the same question because I see where your eyes are.
Well, I just was going to say, like, as far as what you're doing now, like you've gone from holding companies to indies, to legacy players to nimble upstarts, like, explain to the audience listening, like what your current role is and sort of how is like there been this big difference in mindset that making that shift.
So when I started making the shift, when I was at Group M, and then I got recruited away to go to Publicis before Publicis Media was around. So I had the first opportunity to actually create something from scratch, which is called Blue 449, right? And then I ended up creating something or evolving something to make it extremely better, which was Nina, which was advanced analytics. And then I ended up combining that with Emphasize, which was another company that Publicis acquired through Sapient. I've always had the ability to kind of create change and develop something new because I showed the business rationalization for doing it. But everything looks great on a PowerPoint slide, right? But you actually deliver, and you have to prove it. And I became really good at creating a business case and actually showing it pretty quickly, the value of it. But you start realizing at holding companies, and I don't think this is the intention of any holding company, honestly, because I would argue that Horizon now is a holding company. It's just a private holding company. They start buying their way to into everything. They don't really like to grow from the underpinnings of it all, right? So you buy in bulk, and eventually you start getting bloated, and eventually you start getting really complex, and eventually nothing really gets done because nobody really knows how to get it done, right? And then somebody like me sits around and says, okay, this is going to take way too much time. We're going to focus way too much energy into the wrong things and not really the right things that are actually going to help our people, which is therefore our people are going to help our clients, and therefore the businesses are going to grow. I said, I want to keep doing these types of things, which is building businesses. I just want to do it in a where less layers,
it's an entrepreneurial muscle that you're building, right? Like there are some frameworks in place, but you have a little bit more freedom within that to build, right? So
particularly in spaces like, I would say, retail and commerce, but even healthcare, life sciences, and pharma places. But I'll take retail and commerce because to Valerie's point, that's where Night Market and Neon focus primarily, right? That's what we built to focus on in the retail and commerce, media, creative, experience, data, analytics. Something that moves this fast, right? You can't have what the holding companies do. It just you can't move at that pace, right? And what they're trying to do is buy to try to create that distance between the dynamicism of a market like this, and plus what they can do, right? And I look at that and saying on the face value on the surface, it looks right, but in history it's proven wrong consistently, right? It just doesn't work, right? Again, it might look right, but it doesn't fundamentally work. So in order to win in a place like that, you got to try to overcome and try to create. And I'm going to say you don't buy, but the notion of just buying to get ahead I don't think it's right. So it really comes down to the three ways I've looked at growth, which is partner, buy, build, right? So you bring each one of those assets into the mindset and says, how do I get further faster, right? But how do I go further faster and create value, right? And that's ultimately the biggest reason why I decided to come to Horizon and ultimately help my partner and I build Night Market in Neon.
I love that. I mean, this is a common theme now that Valerie and I have been tapping into with some of our even more recent guests, right? At a time when some people are talking about in-housing, right? We're talking to brands and they want to build some things internally, and you've got some specialized agencies doing things and technology platforms building things, right? There is this question of whether we build, whether we buy, or whether we partner. And partnering with experts who actually live and breathe this stuff can be a cost saver, a time saver, but you have to surrender some control, right? So there's always a give and take. As someone now who's been, I don't want to call you an agency lifer, but some of us are, and we just have to accept it, right? But you've seen the best and worst of that. Do you think that there are certain types of companies that are more conducively flexible to adapt to those different build, borrow, buy, partner models, or is some of it broken beyond repair?
Yeah, I think the holding companies have to keep doing what they're doing, and I don't consider Horizon like a true definition of a holdco because Bill Koenigsberg still owns it, and that's the beauty of it, because you just go to Bill and you say this is what we should do, and if he agrees, we go do it, right? So you don't have to go through all this craziness. And the holdcos, I think they have no choice but to do what they're doing right now. They think the only way that they're going to compete is to buy everything, right? And look, Publicis has been on a crazy spree. I mean, look at Omnicom and IPG, right? At the end of the day, but you look at what Vivendi did with Havas, right? Look at what Dentsu's trying to do. Look at what Stagwell is doing with Punt, right? They're all trying to buy themselves into positions because they fundamentally think that scale is going to give them a competitive advantage. If you also look at that same dimension refracted through the people that have left those holdcos and have started things on their own, because they realize that why they got into this space is no longer what makes them happy, right? So they're like, we've heard it enough from clients that this is moving too slow. You got all these things, but it's moving too slow, right? And it's really complex. So can we get back to the world of just, I'm working with the CEO, I'm working with the chief whatever, I'm working with these people that actually love what they do, they're passionate, and I don't care if they own everything, but if they're smart, they can bring the right pieces together, right? And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of these independent type of agencies keep growing, because as much as the consolidation is happening, at the same time, you're seeing a scale of independent agencies coming out. And I would argue that's the reason they're doing it.
Interesting. So like specifically with Night Market, I think there's some sort of line there connecting culture, commerce, and creativity. So
I like alliteration, by the way. So I remembered that.
I know the 3 C's. You two love alliterations, and my name is one, so maybe that's why you like me. What does it actually mean in the world of endless algorithms and shrinking of attention spans? Like, how are you setting yourself apart?
We built Night Market as a data and tech company. Not a surprise, given the background that I come from and given where the background that Randy comes from as well, right? So we thought about Night Market as a platform, and where we can build services and solutions on top of, right? So with Night Market, its conception was really this notion of driving incrementality before the word incrementality became a sexy word, right? So we were talking about this notion of why should marketers spend any money? And people talk about this notion of incrementality like they talk about AI, like it's a new thing. And I show them research that I used to do 30 years ago where we used to show incrementality from MMMs. And they're like, oh, I said, well, when was it not about this? That's what I'm curious about. You talk about like, this is a new thing. And the reality is that's what everything should be doing. I don't care if it's audience, message, medium. I don't care what it is. So we built Night Market as this notion of incremental outcomes. Most of those incremental outcomes in sales. But it doesn't have to be sales. I call it share of mind, share of choice, and share of wallet. All those things are valuable. Right? But in this world today, where commerce has become pervasive, it's not bound by screen, it's not bound by place, it's not bound by time. Right? It is fluid, it is ambient, it is not binary. Right? Think about what you do, think about what I do. Look at my goddamn kids, what they do, right? And I tell them what I do, and I tell them, there's a funnel. They're like, what's a funnel? Nobody talks like that, Dad, and nobody thinks like that.
Unless they're in college, then they may know.
They may know, right? But I tell them this notion of like awareness, and they're like, that's Dad. I know friends of mine that go to TikTok shop and they don't know anything, and they buy a product in 5 seconds. And you're like, okay. So we built Night Market in the context and the frame of ultimately, how do you help a brand power this notion of a pervasive store, right? So if it's pervasive, whenever, wherever, however, right, a consumer or shopper chooses, think about that in the world of what marketing used to be. And if you can't live and play and win in that world, then you've lost.
So this idea of the store is interesting to me, but it's also, not to make it a play on words, although that happens naturally sometimes, but a lot of the best people with whom we have worked, and we haven't worked together, but I think I'm beginning to see this pattern here. But I call people like you a whole brain, right? You've got this left brain understanding, but you understand the right brain as well, and you can kind of navigate that. Mm-hmm. For me, not everyone on the media side of our ecosystem is a great storyteller, right? But I think the best media storytellers are winning. So how do you make it measurable and leverage that data warehouse that is your brain, but also the access that you have, without just like crushing the soul of it?
Yeah. We just entered an award, the first ever for Night Market. And the Con Award is really creativity. And what I told them was I'm going to flip the script, and what that means, I'm going to call it media creativity. Right. And so we live in that world of media creativity, right? So you can take data. I call it this notion of data-driven, insight-led, action-oriented, right? So data should be the fundamental thing, but data without action is useless. And so when we create these notion of what could be, right, what the potential and possibilities are, what those scenarios manifest themselves, right? Our secret weapon is something called Neon, right? So we built Neon as a fundamental discovery and decisioning platform to power Night Market. So because the whole idea is incremental outcomes, but how you get there is critically important, right? So how you plan which audiences you focus on. How do you communicate what you say? How many times do you say it? Where do you say it? How frequently do you say it, right? So this notion of triangulation, right, is critically important in this notion of the pervasive story. Stories are critically important because data cannot override this notion of creativity, right? In the world of media, unfortunately, it's very one and zero, right? We've over-engineered the notion of performance. In the creativity world, it goes the complete opposite of the extreme, right? It's all about big, splashy, bold, and nobody can put a number behind it. Right? But if you can take those aspects, those powerful elements, and figure out how you connect those elements, you get something called media creativity, right? Where you can create context, culture, and commerce coming together, right? Where you can meet somebody at what we call this aperture moment, right? Where a consumer or a shopper has opened the possibilities in their mind, right? To allow somebody in to have a conversation with them. Night Market, powered by Neon, is really about finding those aperture moments. And once we find those aperture moments, the idea is give those consumer shoppers, right, the ability to receive information that will empower them to create a seamless transaction.
So like when you think about the evolved definition of the store
Yeah.
that you talked about, like, you know, something that lives across time, spaces, and places, like, do you feel like this is exactly that, like what you're
Yep.
talking to?
So I'll give you an example of what I think a pervasive store really means, right? I see my kid puts on an Oculus, goes into a T-Mobile store to pick up a virtual iPhone, right? And he can buy that iPhone from that virtual store that he's got a virtual device in his hand, and he can buy a physical. That's crazy, right? I mean, you are now in a gaming environment that is VR, but you're actually in a physical store with somebody speaking to you that's an AI agent, allowing you to play around with and customize your products. That's the world. When I talk about pervasivity, that's the world.
Right, but there need to also be, and maybe this is what neon is.
Yeah.
By the way, I love the
Yeah.
idea of neon that glows at night in a
Yeah.
market. I have this whole visual in
Yeah.
my head already. It looks,
Yeah.
it's like a modern day Hopper painting. But when you think about the data that you need to have access to understand that, I mean, that's not really a consumer journey if they haven't
Yeah.
left their house to buy this
That's
thing, yet
right.
they're in the virtual world. So I'm kind of
Yeah.
confused by what the word journey means now.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
there's information and there's insights. You're getting both.
Yep.
But is there this dashboard now where you're able to track that? Is that what neon is?
Yeah. So neon ability is to really understand the combination of an audience and channels that will deliver incremental outcomes, right? So which audiences have the highest predisposition, right, to actually create this behavior and drive a transaction, right? Now, at Horizon, the journey and the transformational journey that Horizon's been on is also one of extreme power. And so the evolution of Horizon into another platform type of company is powered by a ecosystem called Blue, right? And something that we've made public, and something that we've spoken quite a lot about its power. Blue is really the ultimate power of discovery, and what Blue enables us to do, which we have a great partnership with TransUnion, and we have a great relationship with an AI. Well, they have several AI components to it called Accio. And when we pull those pieces of information, inclusive of the powerful products and capabilities that Horizon has, we can now create this framework of, tell me which audience has the highest predisposition to do something. Show me their typical pathway into making that decision, right? Identify the inflection points or the influenceable points, right? Talk about persuadable prospects, what we call this notion of persuadability, right? You don't want to speak to everybody, but you want to speak to those people that are persuadable. Find those moments where you can persuade. How do you create channel mixes that ultimately have an outside level of persuadability? And how can you prove those out with sophisticated analytics? If you take what Blue does and you connect that to Neon, that 1 + 1 = 3. That's how we achieve what we achieve of this notion. Because I do believe there is not a journey, there are micro journeys. And they constantly evolve. Somebody's journey can be a second, 5 seconds. Somebody's journey could be, I would say, days or weeks. It depending on the need state, it's depending on what they're trying to achieve. It's ultimately depending on what they're trying to purchase and when they're trying to purchase.
You've worked with and probably gleaned learnings from the biggest tech platforms and data providers in the world. We hear this term, the attention economy, right? That transcends really all aspects of this, whether you're creative trying to cut through the clutter, or on the media side trying to deliver that message at the right time. Is this hype? Is this reality? Is this both?
Again, the word attention to me is very funny, because the industry now highlights something that I would argue was always the fundamental thing when the first print ad came out, right? So how do you make sure somebody receives a message if you don't capture their attention for enough time for that message to seed into the consciousness of that person, right? So when I look at these definitions of, well, an impression is an impression if it's counted for 3 seconds, it's got to be viewable above the fold.
Someone's making those rules, yeah. Above
Somebody's
my pay grade.
But here's the thing, right? What is attention? To me, you create all this great, here's the audience, here's the message, here's the journey, here are the channels, right? And then nobody talks about, wait, hold on a second, right? We talk about reach and frequency, important mechanisms, right? But nobody talks about influenceable reach and frequency, right?
Like receptivity, you mean? Like from a consumer perspective?
Yeah. So resonance and receptivity is interesting because you can put something out there, right, in this world where you have these devices, your phones, that people are just scrolling up and down, right? People are not paying attention to anything. How do you stop somebody to pay attention enough to understand what you're trying to communicate to them, right? Our industry is called communications for a reason. Information is the most critical thing. That's why advertising and marketing exists, is to offer information to a population so they can receive that information and make an informed decision one way or the other, right? So by design, you have to have somebody's attention in order to communicate something to them, right? This world is really interesting because we talk about those things, but when you look at the opposite of what is happening, it's quite the opposite of that, right? Nobody really talks about this. No, they talk about attention is important and we're optimizing towards attention. And then you look at it and you're like, no, you're not actually optimizing towards attention. You're still optimizing towards clicks, and you're still optimizing towards engagement. And well, engagement is a form of attention. And you're like, well, that's not really true.
Yeah, I mean, look, some are actions and then some are results of those actions, and I think those get muddled together. So the short answer to my question was hype then, or maybe not. Maybe it's both.
I think what you're seeing, maybe how people are trying to use it, they're trying to redefine attention into something that benefits them, right? Our industry loves doing that. The tech platforms, everybody always, like, for example, like ROAS, right, which is a flawed metric.
We were just going to ask you about that.
So somebody puts an I in front of ROAS and thinks it makes it better, right? And you're like, if you put I, I'm gonna curse for a little bit now. If you put something in front of shit, doesn't make it better shit. It just means shit, right? I mean, at the end of the day,
it may be more descriptive. I don't know.
But so to me, our industry loves just trying to take something that I agree with. Attention, I think, is critically important, right? Because it's proven over time. You look at WFA, you look at IPA, you look at WARC, you look at any body of evidence. And I've sat on those boards. I've evaluated the research. I've even done a tremendous amount of research with them. It gets proven out quite a bit. Then you take that in this world and say, yeah, you know what? That's going to be way too hard for us. One, or, you know what, if we actually do it that way, it's actually going to hurt our business. So we're just going to take that and we're going to change the definition of it all to actually suit our needs. Right. and then you're like, well, okay. So it is hype to answer your question, Matt. And if you look at most of these platforms, but I think it's powerful if you focus on the trueness of what it actually meant to be.
If marketers are looking for business outcomes and they're really using ROAS as like the main, measurement, what do you recommend future forward we should be thinking about?
I would argue that accountability and proof has always been something that has been critical, but it's always been out of the reach of some CMOs, right? They're getting close, and then the world changes on them. They're getting close, and then the world changes on them, right? And so it's a very interesting kind of dynamic to be in this day and age. It means significantly more in the world of uncertainty, right? The world that we're living in right now, right? Anytime the world is uncertain, the scrutiny and the spotlight goes into accountability and proof, right? And then people revert back to the easiest thing, and I would argue the most selfish thing, which is ROAS. Here's the thing about ROAS. It's flawed because by definition, right, it is not incremental. it was developed in the world of digital attribution. And I'm not going to go back through history, but we've all proven that one not to be fallacy, right? How can the last thing take 100% credit for everything? It's like, you look at that and you're like, how do we ever allow the industry to even fathom something like that? But we did, right?
I'm in out of home. You don't even
Yeah.
you don't even know how I feel. I'm in out of home.
First, site attribution. How do we do that?
Yeah, it's crazy. So it is critical. ROAS, if you look at WFA and you look at WARC and you look at these guys, it's proven consistently over time that ROAS has an inverse correlation to incrementality. Right? If you focus on ROAS, you're actually hurting your business in the long run, right? You're actually losing money. And to a certain extent, what that means is you're actually giving your competitors an advantage. That's what it means, right?
Yeah, so there's an opportunity cost at the very least.
Oh,
right?
100%, 100%. And here's the thing is when you focus on ROAS, you're overcompensating in performance by definition, right? So what you're doing then is diluting the value of the brand. And ultimately, you're diluting the totality of the power of marketing. If you look at history, right, it will tell you that when you do that, net, you lose. Some brands lose consistently. We saw that during COVID. We saw that in the 1930s. We saw that in the 1980s. We saw that in the 2000s. We're going to see that now when brands are pulling back. When we look at this 3 years from now, we're going to see almost the same exact thing, which is fascinating because you would argue that the stewards of this business, right, the people that are actually paying attention to this body of research would learn, and they don't. To me, true incrementality, that means you strip out all organic sales. Right. And what you're left over with is direct influenceable things that you control, because there are a bunch of non-controllable factors, right, in this. So you mitigate the exposure risk to those things, right, or you understand them. The things that you control, which are marketing, right, ultimately do that the best. And that's why we created Neon. Neon's pure purpose is all about incrementality. And that's why we chose that angle to power something like Night Market, because if our number one goal is incremental outcomes, then we created a environment that shows us how to drive the most of that.
Well, I would love for you, because you were just talking about kind of where we are and where we're going.
Yeah.
I've heard you been described as a media futurist, a data interpreter, an innovation Sherpa, right? These are all things I've read or heard or seen, right? But like, as you now look ahead and you are building, but also need to skate where the puck is going, to use that old cliche, is there a shift that you expect to see in consumer behavior or tech that you think most marketers aren't really ready for yet, and you have to kind of do some ad-splaining around?
Yeah, I think the pace of growth and change that we're seeing in retail and commerce, I don't think anybody expected it to be this fast. Even the people like me that try to pay attention to how fast this is moving. So it is disrupted what marketing and media, creative audiences, right, channel definitions, right, segmentation. It has disrupted it completely, because if you look at how fast, and I would argue the first wave of digital was pretty fast, right? 15 years.
In the history of time, that's a small.
In the history of time, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, dinosaurs were around for billions of years, so yes.
Retail and commerce has done that same exact thing in 3. So the world has had 3 years to adapt to something that is growing much faster than that wave of digital, right? Much faster.
And I would argue, by the way, that it's only just scratched the surface, and we've only ever really thought about performance. We haven't even scratched the brand side of.
I will tell you, there's tremendous amount of friction. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, lack of understanding, education, because it was easier because it was just done so long this way. You had the marketing world and you had the chief commercial officer world with the shopper and trade and promo, right? That's all been blown up quite quickly, right? It's all like on a fluid ocean of water, and everything is coming on top of each other and going through each other, right? that to me is, I think, the future, where, and this is why I say this notion of the pervasive store, right? When all of that becomes the same exact thing. What happens when retail media, shopper marketing, trade, national media, all that, right, just kind of integrates with one another? Because let me tell you that the consumers don't think like that, right? They're already way out farther. And here's the crazy thing about it, right? They're moving faster than the market is trying to keep up with them, right? Much faster than that. So I think that's the next thing, through a combination of data and tech, through a combination of maybe a consortium of these retailers, right? Consortium of a tech, consortium of a data. They're going to try to figure out the best ways to kind of create experiences in this notion of the pervasive store.
I think consumer experience, which is a buzzword that can mean a lot of different things. Like, you talk about the store, but where do we get most of our resonant influence from? It's not from the advertiser at this point. It's from you. Whatever brand you mentioned 5 minutes ago, guess what? That's probably what's top of mind. So how do we account for that aggregated source of content that we're getting? I don't know the answer to that, but I kind of do. But I would rather go to the lightning round questions, because you have brought some thunder, and now I want to see if you can bring some lightning.
You got it.
Valerie and I will alternate lightning round questions just so we have time to think them up, although we've written some of these in advance, which is sometimes the only preparation we do. So first question is, most overused word or a term, buzzword in media right now?
Engagement.
Okay.
Underrated skill every media strategist should master.
Understanding.
Okay.
I like that.
Yeah, you turned it around on us. I wasn't expecting that lightning to strike so quickly. You're actually following the brief here. The biggest myth that you encounter with either clients or prospects as you're talking to them, working with them, that you need to find yourself correcting?
They think they know more than they actually do.
All right. Can you name names now? No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, most, and this is the only time that I'll elaborate, but even on the agency side and on the client side, and this is why you get a lot of friction most of the time, everybody lives in their own echo chamber. That's the problem.
Oh, God.
Well, that's why we're bringing you out to the masses, George. This is a mass reach play for us to educate everybody.
I'm grabbing my fish out of the aquarium, and I'm following you with that statement.
You have pet fish, by the way? That's a separate conversation also.
I don't, if I had one.
Okay.
One tool or platform you wish would disappear forever. Or maybe it could be even a buzzword or something, if that makes it easier.
No, I would say ROAS. We can throw that area.
There's no return on that.
No.
If you were not, and I know you had talked earlier about your fleeting aspirations to go into medicine, which, by the way, I also had for about a minute my first semester freshman year, and then I got a C in biology, and I was like, all right, what's next?
Media.
Yeah. What's the easiest thing I could do? Is there an alternative path or some sort of, like, if you weren't in media, what would you be doing?
Probably would be a doctor. I mean, I also like, which I eventually probably will end up doing when I get more time on my hands. I do like lecturing and teaching. So I do that sometimes at some of the universities, and I do it because, again, this notion what we talked about, information, right? If you can get somebody to understand students, right, irrespective of their BA and MBA programs or PhD programs, if you get them to understand something, right, that's powerful to me. And then I generally walk out of there with, oh, okay, so I have a way to get information across to people that makes sense across diverse audiences. Or I've learned now something from them that I can take into the business world. And two is, I would argue that I've come across some really smart people as I've done that, and I've hired some of them, or I've asked people in the industry to hire some of them.
That's great. That's great. And so for the CMOs or the brand leads listening today, what's one mind shift they need to make before jumping into 2026 planning?
I would say be extremely open to possibilities and potential. And said differently is, there's not enough CMOs out there that are willing to go to zero-based thinking.
Both of us just hummed. That may be the mic drop moment to end on.
Don't fear the zero-based thinking.
That's right.
Yeah, but being open-minded is such an underrated skill. And I will just tell you on a personal note, I am glad you were open-minded enough to join us, despite everything you may have heard or read or listened to about our podcast. So, but for real,
appreciate it.
You know, we often talk to, and sometimes our conversations are a bit more skewed towards the creative, because that's just, you know, sometimes those stories are more fun to tell, but I think it's just as important for us to really bring the wisdom, the insight, and look, we're all persuadable in our own way, as you said. So I think that opportunity to inform, to bring back that theme as well, was it was a highlight for me. So thank you, George, for doing this with us, and look forward to seeing you and actually meeting you in real life. I'm sure we've been in the same room at the same time somewhere, but this was a treat, just getting to know you and getting a glimpse into that non-medical yet highly surgical brain of yours.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. You guys enjoy it. Thank you.
Big thanks to George Musi for dropping serious knowledge on the future of commerce media. If you're not rethinking your strategy after this, you weren't listening. Catch you next time on the Snarketing Podcast.